with the country code, which is 1-205-271-2985. Again, toll free for you here in North America, 833-288-EWTN. And outside of North America, country code 1-205-271-2985. We also invite you to use the resources available for you out there in social media land. EWTN Radio's YouTube channel and Facebook page is there for you. Jeff Burson, our producer and social media manager, will get the questions that you leave there in the chat feature. Your words of wisdom, your insights, your inspirations, your words of encouragement, always welcomed here on Women of Grace Live, where, again, we do love having that holy conversation with you. Do want to invite you to get out to our website, womenofgrace.com. We have all kinds of things that are going on. We certainly do. And, this is an important time for us as a people, as the mystical body of Christ here in the world today. And we need to be using this time to our very best advantage. So many of us, sheltering in place, so to speak. We are fairly isolated, but we don't have to be alone. We can come together, and we can come together through electronic means. And we're offering you numbers of ways to do that right there at Women of Grace Live, right there at our website, womenofgrace.com. We invite you to get out there and to take a look and to see the opportunities that we've got available for you. We're going to have a beautiful couple of webinars coming up in May, back to back they are. Thomas K. Sullivan is going to be talking with us about spiritual warfare, the weaponry that we have to resist the devil, and where all of this started and how it's come down to us and what we can all do about it. I'm really looking forward to that series of webinars coming up in May. You can read about that right there on our website, as well as all of the other things. And of course, Women of Grace Live is a means for us to come together as well. So we look forward to hearing from you today. 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Now, I just got to tell you, the reality is that this time that we're experiencing, unprecedented in our time period, certainly not unprecedented in history, but certainly for us today, we've never experienced a moment like this. And it's posing some very important challenges, and it's posing for us some very important decisions that have to be made. One of those comes in the form of what to do about developing a vaccine for this particular virus, for COVID-19. And if you've been following the news at all, you'll see that many of the lawmakers, some of them, are urging Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar to waive the restrictions on research with human fetal tissue and to allow the National Institute of Health to utilize human fetal tissue in coronavirus research. Now, you might recall that back in June of 2019, President Trump put a restriction on the use of human fetal tissue for research and did not want and stated that the National Institute of Health was not to utilize human fetal tissue. Well, pressure now, because of this pandemic, is being placed on the president to rescind that ban and to allow researchers to use human fetal tissue for experimentation and research. Now, how do we feel about that? Do the ends justify the means? And what are some of the ethical problems that are being posed as a result of that? We're going to be talking about that today with our guest. And it's very important for us to understand these ethical issues and why there is such a thing as bioethics to begin with, and how that impacts science, not in a negative way, but rather in a way that is contiguous with the human dignity that is ours. In a way, actually, that enhances, I think, science and gives it a principled expression in the work that it does. And this is very, very important. And Dr. R.J. Snell is a bioethicist. He is director of academic programs at the Witherspoon Institute in Princeton, New Jersey. And he's the academic director of the Aquinas Institute for Catholic Life at Princeton University. We're going to be talking with him about these very important issues. And I want to let you know that we want to hear from you. I'm sure that you have questions on these things. And so we want to give you those numbers again, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. I think that sometimes when we're in the press of a situation, what we want to do is get out of the situation. We want to get out of it as quickly as we possibly can. And there's nothing the matter with wanting to come up with solutions to disease, ways in which mankind can benefit through the use of science and research to be of great value to the human person when he is afflicted. But that doesn't mean that it's no holds bars. And so what does Holy Mother Church say about these things? And how do we use the insight and the wisdom that she gives to us to govern us through these kinds of things? What are the ways in which we can cooperate as a people? With the revealed truth of sacred scripture and the teachings of the church, to take us to a place that we couldn't have gotten to if we would have rushed headlong into ways that would be not governed by the ethics that ought to be applied in these moments. And we understand charity prevails upon us and wants for us to come up with, a means by which we can aid people when they're suffering. But it doesn't mean, or does it mean, that we can use any means? And these are the kinds of questions we're going to be talking about today in light of this, some specific things about vaccines and where vaccines come from in the first place, and what concerns that parents have about using vaccines for their children. All of that is going to be explored in our time together today. I'm going to give you those numbers again: 833-288-EWTN, 833-288-3986. I would invite you to give us a call right now to get on the board so that we can take your calls. You can also use EWTN Radio's YouTube channel and Facebook page. The chat feature is there for you so that you can get your question, comment, insight, inspiration, or word of encouragement up on the board here at Women of Grace Live, and we can address it. Did you know you can text us? Well, you sure can. Let me give you the number that you can use to get a text message to us. Text EWTN to 55000. EWTN to 55000. All of those means are available for you today to communicate with us right here on Women of Grace Live, where we do love having holy conversation with you. As I mentioned to you, we've got a guest with us today, Dr. R.J. Snell. He's going to be talking about these difficult ethical issues in light of the coronavirus epidemic and the desire for a type of vaccine. Get your questions into us at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. We're going to be right with you, along with Dr. R.J. Snell, following our break. Stay tuned.
The reason we pray is, first, we owe God worship, thanksgiving, and adoration. He created us and everything around us. And prayer of praise and adoration is His due for giving us everything, including the thought that we praise. And in that thanksgiving, we are made better for realizing what He does for us.
EWTN is now on Twitter. Get short, timely messages from EWTN on your computer or cell phone. It's easy to stay up to date on a wide variety of topics: pro-life news, Vatican announcements, catechesis, apologetics, the latest EWTN programming, and more. You can link to EWTN on Twitter from our homepage or go to twitter.com/EWTN. At work, at home, at school, and on the road. Stay connected to your world with EWTN's Twitter page.
And this is an EWTN Bookmark Brief. I'm Doug Keck. I just finished speaking with Michael D. Graney about his book, 10 Battles Every Catholic Should Know. That's an entire interview coming soon. But tell us, Michael, why should someone be interested in this book, 10 Battles Every Catholic Should Know?
The first question that pops into most people's minds is, why are you glorifying war? To which I would respond, I'm not glorifying war, and nobody should glorify war. What we should glorify is our response to it. If we meet it with courage and fortitude, no matter how bad it is, it does us good, even if the war itself is not just.
Very good. 10 Battles Every Catholic Should Know. Michael D. Graney is the author. Look for the entire interview coming soon on EWTN. Look for the book through our EWTN religious catalog. EWTNRC.com is the place you can pick the book up. This has been an EWTN Bookmark Brief. We appreciate you stopping by. We'll see you next time.
transforming the world one woman at a time. Let's return to Women of Grace with Johnette Williams.
Welcome back, friends. You are listening to Women of Grace Live. I am Johnette Williams. We're very happy to be with you today, inviting you to give us a call here. Let me give you the number that you can use. It's toll-free for you right here in North America. It's 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. We invite you to pick up the phone. Ryan Penny is there for you, yes, and he is eager to hear from you, and so am I. So just give us a buzz, 833-288-EWTN. You can also text us. Text EWTN to 55000. That's text EWTN to 55000. And finally, EWTN Radio's YouTube channel and Facebook page is available for you. Use the chat feature to get your question, comment, insight, inspiration, or word of encouragement up on the board for us. Jeff Burson, our producer and social media manager, will get that question and get it on up here. Well, I am really, really pleased to introduce to you our guest today, Dr. R.J. Snell. He is a bioethicist, and, you know, as we move through this time of pandemic, there's lots of questions that are being raised and a lot of pressure that's being put on President Trump to rescind the ban on the use of fetal tissue in research, and he put that in place in June of 2019. There's a lot of framing that's going on in the media today regarding all of that, and Dr. R.J. Snell has made himself available to us today to talk about some of these issues and the ethical implications of them. He is the Director of Academic Programs at the Witherspoon Institute in Princeton, New Jersey, and he is the Academic Director of the Aquinas Institute for Catholic Life at Princeton University. Dr. R.J. Snell, welcome to Women of Grace Live. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Oh, delighted to be here, Johnette. Wonderful to be on Women of Grace. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You know, this is a sticky wicket, isn't it? I mean, this is a very difficult ethical moment, and we do have guidelines to help us along to make these decisions, but the pressure has been unbelievable, and it doesn't look like it's going to lighten up.
Well, one of the real delights about belonging to the church is the church thinks in centuries, not in years or minutes. And so at a moment where there's lots of fear and lots of pressure, we have stable guidelines from the church, which has thought about this for a long time. So we're not alone, and we don't have to decide on the fly, thank God.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And praise be to God for people like yourself who are strong in the faith, educated in the faith, and can take these kinds of issues and apply them to the standard that's been set before us. And, you know, it brings me to just make this comment, Dr. Snell. It's important to understand that there are immutable truths, you know, and though we live in a very relativistic age, there are immutable truths, and these immutable truths are meant to guide us and direct us in times like this. But we also live in a media-saturated age, and the media has become less of an institution that reports on the news, but rather has become a shaper of the culture of the day and is a bully pulpit for public opinion. And I think that there is a strong influence of media bias towards some of these issues that govern good ethical decision-making. And it's a matter of the way in which they frame it. How is this issue of the use of fetal tissue being framed today in a way that could lead people to a lack of understanding about the realities that surround this particular issue?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Well, there's an older debate which has been lasting for quite some time now between those who would like to use fetal tissue for a variety of reasons, those who are pro-choice or pro-abortion, who don't understand or don't agree with the church's position on abortion or human dignity. And that's a debate that's been going on for some time. And, of course, those who are secularists or those who have a misguided or misunderstood understanding of the moral life think that the church is anti-human and anti-life, when, of course, it's precisely the opposite. The church is maintaining the dignity of human beings from natural conception to natural death. Where things become even more intensified, of course, is when you have an atmosphere of crisis and fear. And the media really does present the moment as one in which there's massive fear and perhaps massive death coming. And in that kind of context, it's very difficult for some people, if they haven't thought through the issues or if they themselves have given in to fear, to not be swayed and to think that in an emergency, the moral rules change. So just as you noted a moment ago, there are immutable truths, and the immutable truths of human dignity and the value of human life aren't rescinded or set to the side in a moment of crisis or fear. But alas, the media is pretty happy to make it look as if they do. And the church reminds us over and over again that we're created in the image of God. Every person is created in the image of God. Every human is created in the image of God. And we may not use or besmirch the dignity of other persons, even if we're afraid.
Mm-hmm. It's very important, I think, to go back historically and to look at the advent of abortion becoming legal in our country. That took place in 1973. That was kind of a watershed year. A lot of unpleasant things happened in 1973. They seemed to come of a warp and a woof, really. And it was really, I think, the beginning of the destruction of the human family as an institution, or the beginning of an attempt to destroy it. But in 1973, I remember finding an article that was actually written prior to that. And it was written from, it was the California American Medical Association, and it was in their journal. And in this particular article, it stated that there was, a growing desire for abortion to be made legal, and that this was a growing desire within the confines of the medical world. And this article was very, very bold in its statement, in that it said that one of the first things that would have to take place in order for abortion to be accepted by the American population would be to convince the American population that life did not begin at conception. And I remember very clearly that it stated in that article, a fact that we all know. And this article was given to me by Dr. William Brennan, who wrote a book called Humanizing the Vulnerable. It was a photocopy of this article, and he had this in his research. And this is the key thing, I think. And I think that this is the way that abortion has gained a foothold on the contemporary mindset. It's gained, acceptance here because we have been convinced that conception does not begin at the moment of egg meeting sperm, but rather begins at implantation. And so people don't regard the babe in the womb as a human person, but yet science will admit to that, will it not, Dr. Snell?
It's really quite remarkable how the language has been used to convince people about something which is scientifically untrue. So you'll hear oftentimes pro-choice or pro-abortion people refer to the unborn child as tissue or as an alien or as not a person or something. And yet, none of that is scientifically true. If you pick up a textbook on embryology, there is no mainstream embryology textbook used in a medical school or in a biology class at any university which suggests anything else than that at the moment of conception that you have a new, genetically distinct, self-determining human being brought into existence. So it's just terrible science to think that the unborn child or the embryo is not a human being and a distinct human life, and yet the rhetoric and the language has deceived an enormous amount of people, and it's quite intentional. When we look at instances of war, for example, oftentimes the enemy is dehumanized with the choice of language. Something very similar occurs in the abortion debate, where the unborn child is dehumanized through a false use of language. And that's not a religious claim. It's not a position that faith teaches us that this is a human being. It's actually the case that science teaches that this is a human being. And it's really beyond scientific debate.
Mm-hmm. When we think about, this framing of the argument that's being used by the media, that is one of the areas where they try to pit, two realities against each other. They try to pit ethics against science, or science against ethics, and religion against science. But that is not the case. It's really a false construct.
It really is. One of the things that I like to tell my friends and students sometimes is that It is a matter of faith for a Roman Catholic. You are required to believe by faith that reason can reveal the truth, which is really a sort of interesting and funny claim. Already in the Middle Ages, there was a false position being bandied about, which was referred to as the two-truth theory, that there was a truth of religion and there was a truth of reason, and they could contradict. And the church's theologians and philosophers and eventually the magisterium got to work thinking about it and declared that that was in fact not the case, that the truths of reason, science if you would, and the truths of religion not only could never contradict, they weren't even really in tension. What we know by science, the church affirms. What we know by revelation is open and knowable, or at least not irrational, as understood by science and reason. There's just no contradiction to be had.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of that beautiful.
I'm a convert to Catholicism, and that's actually one of the first reasons that brought me in was the Church's openness to science and to reason, both historically and as a matter of principle.
Well, that's beautiful, and welcome to the family. We're happy to have you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, I'm thinking about John Paul II's, and I think it's an encyclical, Fides et Ratio. It's faith and reason. They're not opposed to each other. But again, in the modern bully pulpit of the media, they're going to phrase it that way, and the attempt is to make anyone of faith or anyone who has an ethic that is built on the principles of God, to look foolish and to look as if they're backward and to look as if they're retro in some way, not enlightened, not with the flow of contemporary society. But that isn't the truth. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of these real issues that pertain to the use then of fetal tissue. Why is it unethical to use fetal tissue for experimentation and for research?
So we hold as Catholics, and we believe that reason holds this as well, that the unborn child in any state of development from conception to birth and of course beyond birth is a human being and a person and ought to be afforded the dignity of a human being and the dignity of a human person. And just as we would think that there is something untoward or shameful about experimentation on a 2-year-old, we think that the same kind of shameful experimentation should be disallowed for a child in utero. And just as we would have some pause about experimenting on human remains from someone who's been born and died at a certain age, we think that the human body is afforded dignity. Our laws and moral intuitions all assume we don't desecrate human remains. So, too, the unborn child, the fetal tissue, is to be afforded the same dignity of any and all human remains. And experimenting on humans is not something that we believe is moral or permissible, even under conditions of crisis.
Well,
there's no difference morally between the unborn child and their remains and a born child and their remains.
Mm-hmm. And there are some that would say, well, listen, abortion is legal. Women are going to opt for abortion. We're going to have, these aborted babies, these aborted fetuses. Well, why not use them? I mean, we can take the tissue from these babies, and we can use it for a greater good. We can use it for the benefit of mankind. Isn't that just the same as somebody that donates a kidney or someone who, gives blood to someone? Why is there a difference?
Yeah, of course, that when someone donates a kidney or gives blood, not only is that voluntary, where the embryo or the unborn child is coerced or compelled into this by the choices of another, but there's not, when one donates a kidney or donates blood, there's not a destruction of the human body and its integrity in the same way that abortion brings about death and the destruction of the integrity of the body. And then, of course, we're not consequentialists. So consequentialism is the ethical position that the ends justify the means, essentially, that we determine the moral value of an action when the good results outweigh the bad results. The Church not only is not consequentialist, but we forbid that as the ethical principle. we suggest that there are some actions which are intrinsically wrong and ought never to be engaged in, no matter the good consequences which could result from doing that intrinsic wrong. And even though in this instance we have tissue already available, the child has already been aborted, there's not an abortion directly procured in order to bring about a vaccine, but the tissues are already sort of there being used, and one can sort of understand the argument of, well, they're already there, let's use them. To use those tissues in the development of a vaccine or an experimentation is to not only give approval, but even to cooperate with the moral wrong of abortion. It's a kind of theological scandal to wink and nod and say, well, the tissues are here, let's use them anyway, when we believe that the means by which those tissues were procured, abortion, is immoral and ought never to be engaged in.
Yeah, it seems to me, too, that to the extent that we would permit something like this to happen, that in some twisted way, the thought could arise, in the collective consciousness out there, that now abortion is raised to a new dignity because a mother can sacrifice her child for the sake and the welfare of others. While that sounds outlandish, I don't think it's very big leap for the mind to take. What do you think?
Oh, no, I think you're completely correct that there was a misguided sense that could be fostered that you were doing a public service by procuring an abortion and providing the tissue, and that it would be presented as a moral good, as something akin to providing a kidney or a blood transfusion or something like that. And yet, if we take seriously the equal status of the unborn to the born, we would think that there is a moral horror involved with the sacrifice of a born child, one we see running around, in order to use their body to bring about medicine. And there should be the same sense of moral horror about experimentation on the unborn as well, because they're morally equivalent. They're both human beings, both human persons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a utilitarian approach and the commodification of the human person is what is at stake here as well. And I want to talk about that, as well as some of the vaccines that had their origins in tissue that came from aborted fetuses. And let's talk a little bit about that. We want to hear from all of you. Dr. Snell is here to answer your questions, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. That is the way that you can join us live here. Also, go out to EWTN Radio's YouTube channel and Facebook page and use the chat feature. We want to hear from you right here on Women of Grace Live. Coming back at you. Stay tuned.
Father Larry Richards.
God is the God of life. God is the God of love. So when we conform our life to His life and His will, it's always life-giving. Always.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
Hi friends, Janet Williams here. Would you like some good news in your inbox? Sign up for our daily Grace Lines to receive a daily reflection that includes a quote from sacred scripture or your favorite saint, a beautiful image, and a question for pondering. In less than 5 minutes per day, it is sure to inspire you to live deeply your Catholic faith. Sign up today at womenofgrace.com/sign up or text Women of Grace in all caps to 22828.
Father Benedict Rochelle.
There are legitimate differences of opinion in any religion. There are differences of opinion in Catholicism. But in Catholicism, you expect that people will take the teaching of its supreme authority seriously. To go diametrically opposed to those teachings is to not be a Catholic. Someone in the name of Catholicism is sponsoring the destruction of human life. Lives of unborn children. And they got the name Catholic on the door. The highest authority in Catholicism and the encyclical Humanae Vitae, Evangelium Vitae, is absolutely clear that no Catholic can support abortion and that Catholics are responsible to take serious action against legalized abortion.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
Hi, this is Cy Kellett. Later today on Catholic Answers Live, 2 hours of open forum with our own Jimmy Aiken. Give us a call. Catholic Answers Live, 6 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Women of Grace.
Encouraging women in their gift of authentic femininity. Here's more Women of Grace with Johnette Williams.
Well, welcome back, friends. You are listening to Women of Grace Live, and I am so happy to have with us Dr. R.J. Snell. He is a bioethicist answering questions for us today about the, push today to come up with a vaccine for the coronavirus, for COVID-19. What is ethical? What is unethical? Many of you will recall that in June of 2019, President Trump put a ban, a restriction on the National Institute for Health on using fetal tissue for research for vaccines and for other kinds of purposes. And the push by many lawmakers right now is to have him rescind that ban and to permit fetal tissue to be used. We're talking about the ins and the outs of that today with Dr. Snell. We're inviting you to call with any questions that you might have or any comments that you'd like to make with regard to this issue. And let me give you that toll-free number for you right here in North America. It's 833-288 EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Just pick up the phone. Give us a call here. Ryan Penny's waiting for you. We are too. You can also use EWTN Radio's YouTube channel and Facebook page, and you can register your question there, and we will get it here. Jeff Burson, our producer and social media manager, will grab it, so we invite you to use that. You can text us. Text EWTN to 55000. That's EWTN to 55000. Dr. Snell, on the break there, you and I were having a little chit-chat. You made a comment. I wrote it down because I think it's brilliant. This is a quotable moment, and I want you to explain it. We were talking about the use of technology and the way in which technology can be used for such good, and yet in some cases it can be used for such destruction, and we've all witnessed that. History has proven that to be the case. And you made this statement. You said, we have power we have not been prepared to use well. What did you mean by that?
You know, the church is, of course, in favor of moral and technological development. We want to save lives. We want there to be medicine. We anticipate the kingdom of God in which there will not be disease. We're not people who are in favor of death or disease. And of course, as our scientific prowess advances through human rationality and human knowledge, it's not the case that at the same time and in the same way our moral capacities develop. We're still inflicted by the wounds of original sin. We're still inflicted and affected by vice. And so our power has outstripped our moral capacities. And it's not always the case that merely because we have the power to do something that we ought to, even if that power could bring about what look to be obvious goods. You know, Jesus tells us, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his own soul? And it often feels like that with our scientific powers just now. We're gaining the whole world, and our soul is at some risk.
Yeah. And, we again want to make the point that ethics is not opposed to science, but ethics governs science, and it's really not good science without ethics, because then it's an unleashing, of potentially the affliction of man caused by sin, man's aggressive nature and his greed and his desire for power over others to be expressed. So we see that there's a marriage between ethics and science as opposed to an opposition between them. I want to talk a little bit about the use of fetal tissue in other vaccines. And of course, this is a big topic for a lot of parents today, because if you are pro-life, you don't want to use any kind of a methodology or any kind of medicine or anything else that would come from fetal tissue, realizing the dignity, the value of each human person. But so what do we do about some of these vaccines, and what do we mean by this phrase, if there is a type of descendant cell that has been used for the creation of a vaccine?
Several very commonly used vaccines, for instance, the vaccine against rubella, but not just rubella, are derived from cells which are referred to as descendant cells from several aborted fetuses from the 1960s. So that fetal tissue from the 1960s was used to produce other cells, and in time the vaccines that we use or even receive for our children or for ourselves are dependent for their production upon those descendant cells. So what matters to note here is that the vaccine that one receives or one's children receive does not include any fetal tissue. It's not as if there's bits of fetal tissue in the vaccine. And two, the descendant cells were themselves never part of a fetus. They are not themselves sort of tissue which has been maintained alive from the fetus. They're cells which have been derived from other cells, derived from other cells, derived from other cells, which were themselves derived from fetal tissue. So they're not morally unproblematic, but as we think through their moral implications, we have to make sure we get it right. That there's not fetal tissue in the vaccine, and nor were these vaccines developed directly upon fetal tissue, but rather upon descendant cells. Mm-hmm. The Church has declared, the relevant statement here is from the Pontifical Academy for Life in 2005, that while scientific researchers should avoid using those descendant cells, and while alternatives should be sought, and if alternatives are available, parents should use the alternatives, that if law requires, and if there are grave health considerations to protect one's own life or the health of one's child or the health of a community, one may, in good conscience, receive and use those vaccines while articulating to the physician or the nurse administering them one's reservation so that one doesn't sort of tacitly approve, and only using them if there's not an alternative.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very tricky business.
Yeah.
Technically, what we say is that there is it's two technical considerations. One is, first, culpability in the subjective sense as opposed to the objective culpability. Let me explain. There are some actions which are objectively wrong, but if one person does them, your blameworthiness for them may be very low. So if a person acts out of ignorance, say, or is coerced, their action may be wrong in and of itself, but we might not blame them very much. If a child does something, we may correct them, but we don't think of them as having done something for which they're enormously subjectively guilty of. If one receives a vaccine without knowing the conditions of it, one's culpability for it is very low. And then the second technical term is what we think of as formal and material cooperation. The Church has declared that if one receives a vaccine which is derived from descendant cells, there is a very low level of material cooperation. One is caught up into an objectively wrong situation or an objectively undesirable situation, but you yourself have not performed the wrong act. You're just sort of caught up into it. But you haven't. There's not an act of your will to engage in or to agree with the morally wrong act.
Yeah, and
that's all very technical bioethics.
Well, let me just say that I'm glad you have to work on all of this and not myself. It is a tricky business, and yet again, what you see here is you see the protection of Holy Mother Church. You know, she is really trying to safeguard her children on all counts here, and we have these vaccines that have been created from these descendant cells. And as I was doing some research on this, there was a phrase that was used with reference to them where it states that these descendant cells have been purified of any of the initial tissue that had been used. So I don't know quite what that process is. I don't know if you can shed some light on that or not, or if it's even important to the conversation.
Well, the important thing to remember is, whatever the technical means of it is, that the cells which are used now for the development of rubella vaccine, let's say, are not cells which were ever part of a human body. They were never part of an organic unity which was a human body. So they're not experiments upon a fetal tissue or upon an unborn child.
And that might be very helpful for many parents listening today who are trying to make these important decisions for their children. We have Maria Ray with us. She is in San Angelo, Texas, listening to us via Guadalupe Radio Network. You are a first-time caller, Maria, and we always welcome you with our first-time caller bell. Welcome to Women of Grace, Maria.
Thank you for having me to call in anyway. The reason I was listening to the call, and he said about the fetus being used for the, for experimental and all this, and that's one of the things that they're wanting to bring into our life, which would cause a destruction on everything. Because in wisdom, it also mentions about killing our babies or killing our families and doing things like this in order to survive the others, and it will not be a good thing to do. So I'm just putting in my 2 cents worth there.
Well, we thank you for your 2 cents worth there, Maria. And yes, of course, we agree with what you're saying. We do not look at the human person as a utilitarian entity. We don't look at the human person as one that should be commodified. And that brings up another point, too, Dr. Snell, with regard to this pressure to use fetal tissue for COVID-19. It's almost a Pandora's box. When you open that box up, then it leads to other things. And it's very hard to get all of those things back into Pandora's box again. It's an impossibility. And one of the concerns that we have that we touched on in the first part of the program had to do with the commodification of the human person and this change of perspective that perhaps abortion in and of itself now has some kind of value for the rest of humanity. But there is a very real concern about the selling of fetal tissue as well, which is the selling of the body parts of a human being.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm so grateful to people like Maria, who are women of grace in the world, and their 2 cents add up to a lot in time as they help their families understand and reveal in their own way the truth of things. I'm very grateful to her call and to her for calling and for people like her out there maintaining the truth. The church teaches that each and every human being is created in the image of God. And the church goes so far as to teach that if one were to really understand what you see when you see when you see a child or you see any human around you, you are seeing something very similar to the face of God. And the idea that we would trade in the body parts of the image of God is incredibly distressing. We don't believe that we are just souls who have bodies. We believe that we are embodied souls or ensouled bodies. And thus what happens to our body happens not just to our body, but to us as persons. And to treat the body as if it's just spare parts, or to treat the body as if it's just tissue, is to deny the truth of the Incarnation, where God himself becomes one of us with a real body, and to deny the truth of the human being as well. So we must resist, and we must never cooperate in the selling of human tissue, the use of human tissue, even when it looks like that use could protect us from fear. Now, I will add this as well. It's not as if there are not other alternatives. There are several multinational corporations. There are very large research groups which are at work right now to develop a vaccine which would not rely in any way whatsoever on abortion-derived cell lines. They derive stem cells from earthworms. They do DNA testing on non-humans. It's not as if we're saying you must just learn to get ready to pass away. We support scientific research. We support a vaccine, and we hope that a vaccine will develop first from a non-abortion-derived way, as opposed to the vaccine coming first from an abortion-derived way, and that one getting on the market. So we hope and we pray that these good companies not using abortion lines will get to the market first, and we're eagerly awaiting that.
Yeah, and we can support them in their research efforts with our prayers. You used an important word when you were talking about all this, and that word was could. And could is a great word. It's a conditional word. And the assumption is that if we use fetal tissue, then we're going to come up with a vaccine for the COVID-19, that is the way to the end. But that's not true. We don't know. And that's the big, I think, linchpin here is that there's an uncertainty with regard to it. And I remember a similar case that was being made for Parkinson's disease several years ago with the use of stem cells, and so we wanted to use the stem cells from these babies, and we've never been able, to the best of my knowledge, I remember then, they were never able to successfully use those stem cells in a positive way. But stem cells that were collected like from an umbilical cord were very usable. And there is no ethical question or issue with regard to that. And so human stem cells, adult stem cells were very, very effective in use. But nothing from embryonic stem cells was useful. So, there is a certain kind of, I think, point that needs to be drawn from that this is a maybe as opposed to a definite thing.
When President Bush, the second President Bush, prohibited new embryonic destructive research, and instead he and the Council on Bioethics said that stem cells, adult stem cells, which are not human destructive, should be used. There was a hue and outcry from certain sectors about how anti-scientific this was and how it would result in the loss of new medicines and deaths. And it turns out that not only are stem cells perfectly ethical to use for adult-derived stem cells, but the medicines and treatments which developed from stem cells were more productive, more helpful, and more fecund in saving lives than the embryonic destructive research ever was. Mm-hmm. And so at a moment where people say, look, we could develop a new line, we could save lives, we don't know if that's the case, to begin with, A. B, in God's good providence, we are never to do an intrinsic evil ever, and we know that in God's good providence, His grace will provide and is sufficient. And like John Paul II always reminded us, we're to not be afraid. Be not afraid, he would say over and over again. And in our fear, do something wrong. Mm-hmm. So you're certainly correct that just because something could be done does not justify that it ought to or should be done, especially when it's the case that perfectly ethical alternatives exist, and we support using them.
Yeah. We have a Facebook question from Jane, and then we're going to go to Sharon, who is out there holding on a call. Jane wants to know, could we get a vaccine from another country that used fetal tissue without knowing it?
Yeah, thank you, Jane. I mean, that's certainly possible, and it's definitely the case that in an era of globalization and multinational corporations that may be the case. Of course, we have people working at the National Institutes for Health and the FDA and HHS to make sure that such things don't happen, and we can act in good faith and in good conscience, knowing that we have real oversight and regulatory oversight to ensure that such a thing doesn't happen, or that if it does, we would at least know about it and be able to act in an informed way.
Very good.
There are really good people at HHS right now, really good people at HHS.
Excellent. We have Sharon with us. She's calling us from Cold Lake, Alberta, and she has a question for us. She's a first-time caller listening on Sirius XM 130. Sharon, welcome to Women of Grace. How are you?
I'm doing great. I was just listening to your program, and I actually agree that you shouldn't use fetal tissue in order to find a vaccination for any type of viruses that do occur. I agree with that. And at the same time, too, my question is that isn't a safer example if ever a law or a bill passed that stated that they can use fetal tissue, would that have future implications on there could be future implications, and could there be future implications in terms of them using that as an excuse to use human fetal tissue to make vaccinations in the near future?
Well, thank you, Sharon. I myself grew up in Alberta near Cold Lake, so very nice to hear the Alberta accent coming through. There's always a danger that if you opened the door just a bit and you use something which was not used before, that it hardens the conscience and hardens the heart, and then we're willing to do the next time what we would have been horrified to do the time before, and we can see that certainly in the instance of abortion. One issue of terminology or clarification, all fetal remains that are derived from humans are human remains. There's no fetal tissue that's from a human that's not a human remain. So one of the things we're trying to do and make sure that we do now is get ahead of the problem, to find an alternative now to support the administration's rejection of fetal tissue research now, so that we don't 6 months from now or 6 years from now discover that we have allowed the door to be opened and now we're complicit and now things are even worse. So certainly the idea of moral harm, where one moment of collaboration opens up the door to more collaboration, is certainly something to be concerned about. I agree with that.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for your call today. And as we consider all of these things, Doctor, what words of advice would you give to us as we move forward through this time?
Well, we believe in prayer. We also believe in reason. And so pray that an alternative would be found. And then we use our reason. We live in a free society. It's perfectly acceptable and maybe even our responsibility to write our bishops, to write our representatives in Congress and the Senate, to write the administration and voice our objection to embryonic destructive research or to any research which uses fetal tissue, and to support alternatives. It's also possible to invest funds, if one has funds to invest, in corporations or companies which are using moral means of developing a vaccine. That would be a reasonable thing to do as well. So we can pray, which is itself a form of action, and then we can also use the normal democratic means available to us of voicing our concern.
Well, Dr. R.J. Snell, I want to thank you so very much for being with us today, for the good advice and counsel you've given us, for the explanation and instruction you've offered us. And I hope, friends, that, as we continue to move through this time, we do exactly what the good doctor suggests we do, and that is to turn our attention to the one who is the way, the truth, and the life, to his church and the teachings of his church, which will always guide us in the way in which we should go. Dr. Snell, thank you once again. Friends, it's been great being with you, inviting you to get out to our website, womenofgrace.com, see all of the things that we've got available for you there. Until we have the opportunity to be together again, may God bless you. And don't forget, tomorrow is the consecration of the United States and Canada to our Blessed Mother. God bless you now. Bye-bye.